Good evening. It is 6 o'clock, and we will go ahead and get started with our annual organizational meeting. And the first thing we have is our annual budget hearing to begin now.
Okay, I think everybody had a packet included in their
Board communication?
thank you. Whatever that is. On page 2, I'll start there, is the appropriations for all the funds. General fund is $37.3 million. Capital outlay fund is $14.5 million. The special education fund is $8.8 million. Bond redemption is $3,135,000, and the food service fund is $4,050,000. That's the expenditure side of it. On the next page, it lists the revenues. Third line from the bottom. Revenues for each of those funds: $36,785,000 in the general fund, $8,025,000 in the capital outlay fund, $8.5 million in the special education fund, $3,030,000 in the bond redemption fund, and $3,790,000 in the food service fund. So those total revenues minus the expenditures that were on the first page shows a deficit in each of the funds of $525,000 in the general fund, $6.5 million in the capital outlay fund, $300,000 in the special education fund, $100,000 in the bond redemption fund, and $260,000 in the food service fund. The general fund and special education fund are what we consider our term a structural deficit, the ongoing revenues versus ongoing expenses. The capital outlay fund is a one-time large deficit, paying cash for the high school addition project of just under $10 million. We'll touch on that later in the presentation, the management of those fund balances. The next slide has the revenue, total revenue broken down for you. Local sources are 43.7%. Or state sources are 43.7%. Local sources are 48.6%. Excuse me, and federal sources are 6.1%. The majority of the revenues for all of the funds. Total of $60,128,000. Total expenditures, the general fund comprises 55% of the total $63.8 million. It's a little skewed this year with the capital outlay fund being so large with that large construction project in there. That fund is usually about $6 million, so we're adding another $9 million in there. Special education fund is 13%. That's pretty normal percentage of the total. Food service is 6%, and the bond redemption fund is 4.6% of the total. $67,843,000 of total expenditures. Next slide is a salary slide that shows where the total salaries of the district are paid out to. Teachers and educational assistants directly into the classroom, 75%. 6.5% custodial and maintenance. 3.7% Board of Education, Central Office and Technology. 4% in the food service department. 6.6% in the building principals, directors, and clerical staff, and then just under 5% for transportation. Next refers to just the general fund revenues of $36,785,000, where those monies come from. Local taxes are right at just under 30%. And then state aid, state sources are 63%. Federal is 3%. Other local sources are 1.8%. And then the operating transfer of $800,000 is 2.2%. So the majority of our money in the general fund is coming from the state aid. We're just growing so fast that the local taxes don't keep up with although that when this was prepared, I didn't have final valuation numbers, and as we'll speak later in there, those went up considerably. There's a lot of reassessment. I'll just touch on that right now, that we're over $3 billion of total valuation. That's up just under 20%, 19 point some percent. Of that 3 billion, or that, I think it was 450 million that it went up in 1 year. Half of that, roughly half of that is growth, and the other half is reassessments. So 10% of our valuation increase is valuation increases, and the other 10% is growth. The total general fund expenditures, $37,310,000, 63% in the instructional area, 34% in support services, 2.5% in co-curricular, and just under 1% for early retirement benefits. The next slide shows where those expenditures are. Salary and benefits, 86.5%. And then the other three categories of supplies, purchase services, and utilities are each about 4%. So it is highly leans towards the people. There's not much left after you pay for the people that work for the school district. Utilities, though, of just under 1.5 million, that always jumps out at me. Just to open the doors, it's $1.5 million in utilities. The next slide is the capital outlay fund. As I said, it's skewed a little bit this year in the fact that we have that big high school addition project up there, 9.3 million. And it's total, it's 9.7 million, but some of that was paid this or the past school year. So it's in a construction and projects in process account. That's 64% of the total capital outlay budget. And then the instructional programs are 1.4 million, and textbooks and library books are 1.2 million. The operating transfer is 800,000. Transportation is 482,000. Other facility improvements are just under 600,000. So you can kind of see the breakdown of where we're spending all the money of the capital outlay fund. 14.5 million in expenditures and $8 million of revenue. As I told you before, that we had put aside money for the high school addition project, and that's where the remaining 6 million will come out. 6.5 million will come out of reserves. Special education department for 22-23. Expenses are 8.8 million. Revenue is 8.5 million. Structural deficit about 300,000 in that fund. Expenses shot up pretty good in special education this year. You can see the breakdown of where that money is being spent. Co-op services are contain a lot of our budget in the special education service. 18% of our budget is paid out to the co-op services. 72% of instructional. 5% is transportation. We spend a lot of money on transportation of special needs. There's such individualized situations that cost a lot of money to transport those kids. Okay, the next slide is what I was gonna spend a little bit more time, and probably the biggest thing of our budget is the management of those fund balances. It becomes kind of a teeter-totter game to manage those fund balances, but we've in the past done a very good job of staying right at where we want to be in the 15 to 20% of our total budget in the fund balance. So you can see on the general fund what happened this year. We were budgeted for $435,000 deficit, and we ended up with just under $200,000, $190,000 deficit. So our fund balance will go down approximately $200,000. this current year, 21, 22, or last current year, I should say. So at the end of this year, 21, 22, we'll have $8,182,000 approximately in fund balance in the general fund. Capital outlay fund will show a fund balance of 8.4 million. And as I said, we're using 6.5 of that to help pay for the project. So that was the whole intent of that, building up that fund balance of 8.4 million, is to pay for this high school addition project. It's a pretty big deal also in this budget, I think, having a $10 million project that you're just able to pay out of existing funds. The bond redemption fund, now that fund jumped up a little bit in its fund balance. You can slide up, Jared, just a little bit. That jumped up due to the fact that we closed out Inspiration Elementary into the bond redemption fund. Inspiration Elementary was under budget, roughly $580,000. That gets closed out into the bond redemption fund because it was financed by general obligation bonds. So those monies will allow us to manage, to deficit spend a little bit and manage that fund balance so we don't have to increase the taxes in the bond redemption fund. The $580,000 that we underspent on the Inspiration project, I did a little calculation on that. That project came in at $185 a square foot. If you could do that today, you wouldn't be sitting here tonight. You'd be having a pina colada somewhere. It's just amazing the cost of construction that's gone up. But even with that, to do that project at 185 is something I'm very proud of. That was a very good number and price. So that closed out into the bond redemption fund, putting the fund balance at 1.5 million at the end of this year. The last slide is kind of a summary slide of the 22-23 budget highlights, what went up, what went down. You can see in the expenditures that we had a 7% general fund increase in expenditures, a big jump in the capital outlay fund, 9% increase in the special education fund, 4% increase in the bond redemption fund, and a 14% increase in the food service fund. Remember, we did some adjustments in salaries in the food service fund, so that's the reason for the larger jump in expenditures there. Revenue side, general fund is up 6.8%, so just under the 7% increase in expenditures. The revenue in the capital outlay fund is down a little bit. We had more federal revenue, federal reimbursements in the capital outlay fund last year than this year. Special education fund, likewise, we had more federal revenues in there. They had some ARA, I think that's what they called it, ARA. There's so many acronyms for the COVID money that they passed out, but there was a good chunk of that in there in the special education fund last year, so we're short that this year. Bond redemption fund, the revenue's same as it was last year, and then the food service fund, revenues are down 5%. You know, that's once again all the COVID federal funding of the food service fund. That's ended. General fund highlights, the fund balance, as we talked about, decreased to $8.2 million. There's a 6.8% increase from revenue from the previous year. That equates to $2,355,000. Where that comes from, state aid increase of 6% is $1.8 million. And then we're projecting 180 new kids for $1.2 million. And then we had a federal revenue decrease of $500,000. And in 21-22, we missed our enrollment projection by 20 kids. So that was down, made a difference of $150,000. So the sum of those would equate to the $2,355,000. On the expenditure side then, we had a 7% increase. Main increase there is salary and benefits, as we talked about, 6.5% increase across the board. And a large portion of the health insurance that you guys assumed this year. Additional staff of 850,000. So it's a majority of our budget is, as you saw earlier, is all in staff, salaries and people. There's some retirement savings, and once again, the ESSER expenditures are down from last year's budget. And then about $200,000 of other stuff we went up. So it's very salary generated in the general fund. Concerns on the general fund, we do have some concerns right now with our enrollment projections. My enrollment projections, I should say, we projected 180 kids increased, and we're not there. Our kindergarten was down 30 from projection, so that always just, that triggers a thing. And our elementaries are not showing the increase that we normally see, so it's hard to believe when you look at all the building and whatnot, but we'll have to see how that turns out. I have to believe that it's going to get very, very close to our projection just based on all the building, but when you look at the numbers, the elementaries just are not there right now. Hopefully they're coming. The capital outlay fund, as we talked about, $480 million increase in valuation, just under 20%, 19%. Half of that is valuation increase and half of it's growth. 68% of that total budget is going into facility improvements. And then the rest of the expenditures you can see there: technology, textbooks, transportation, and operating transfer to general fund. You remember on the operating transfer to the general fund, we decreased that from our normal $900,000 down to $800,000, just due to the fact of the capital outlay fund having a lot of expenditures with the new high school addition this year. Special education fund had a 9.2% increase in expenditures from the previous year, $738,000. As we talked about earlier, that jumped up, and the revenues only increased 4.8%, $393,000. That's due to the decrease in the federal monies that we received in 21-22. Lastly, when we talked about the bond redemption fund balance jumping up $600,000 to $1.5 million total due to the transfer of the proceeds from the Inspiration Elementary under budget proceeds going into there. So this is my 33rd time doing this. It's seems to be getting better and better. This is even though we're showing a deficit in each one of the expenditures, and the structural deficit in special ed and general fund, it's that management of the fund balance. It's a fine line, but we've just, I think, done a very, very good job of running that teeter-totter. The accounting handbook is going to tell you that you don't spend those reserves on recurring expenditures, but if you pay attention, you can do it.
How do you figure with the enrollment, the 180? Is that more in the elementary than anywhere?
Generally, yeah.
You figure, or how do you figure in the so-called the housing market and growth? You can't really.
It's difficult.
I mean, because out of that 180, you got to figure in obviously new kid,
Right, and we do a lot of that's driven by history. I just lay out a lot of years of enrollments and just go through each grade and find out what the percentage increases are in grades, and they'll generally shift. Parents will shift grades when they're going into, now it's intermediate school. It used to be middle school, but now a lot of them will shift when they're going into intermediate school or middle school. In the high school, will generally not grow. it'll grow just on sheer numbers, but it won't grow with new kids.
Transfers.
Right, right, because, and so majority of growth each year is in the elementary, yeah. That is an accurate statement. Those classes will, past history has shown that I think I put in a 3.5% to 4% growth factor in each one of the grade levels this year. That's where we're a little short right now, which is weird. Never had that. Never had that. And the kindergarten, I've missed that before. That's down 30, which it's a bummer, but is what it is, and I'm sure it'll spike back up the next year,
We're leaving out, yeah.
Yeah. And that's what, as you guys all know, that's what drives our budget, kids. Any other questions?
I guess I would just like to note publicly a thank you to Mr. Lundberg and the business office staff. The number of countless hours that go into the work of our budget, I can't even guess and or imagine. I just know that it's countless, and he and his staff do an absolutely incredible job. And Mr. Lundberg has done a wonderful job of, as he's referenced, managing that fund balance and putting kids and our staff first. And being aggressive in that approach has allowed us to do some pretty incredible things in terms of educational experiences for our kids, and also support of our staff through compensation, benefits, all of those various things. So hats off to him and his 33rd budget. It is a true work of art. I hate to put him on the spot and ask a question, because I don't like to do that, but I think I'm going to, because we have 9 minutes. This year has to have been the most challenging year to put together what you would like to believe is an accurate budget, given the rate of inflation, the changing costs from month to month, day to day. I mean, how do you put together a number for diesel fuel? How do you put together a number for, some of those various things that, quite frankly, we've worked through at the high school edition already, with numbers that change so fast. Obviously, I have fixed stuff, but this has to have been one of the most challenging budgets that you've put together in your career. I guess, can you speak to what was the most challenging part?
Those are definitely difficult things in today's world, just trying to, you look at what it's gone up at from, everything with numbers and budget is, in my opinion, is history. So you just drill back on the history, see what I spent last year. I spent $145,000 on fuel. I know it went up X percent, and then try to project what it's gonna come down a little bit, and so you get a 20-25% increase in there, and hope it hits. Sometimes it doesn't hit, but that's why you have $8 million of fund balance and the management of that fund balance. Sometimes it doesn't hit. But utilities, that's gone up a big number, the gas, natural gas. And I always kind of chuckle a little bit about natural gas, because this whole building is electric. And when the natural gas is electric, it's pretty steady. It just goes up a little bit every year, but natural gas jumps around. And last year, remember, we had that Texas deal where it just really threw a wrench into stuff. So that jumped way up this year, and it's still high. But with this, our main building being electric, it's kind of steady Eddie, hangs in there. But it's up when all the other buildings are natural gas, and most years they're lower. That it's a better thing to have natural gas. But I chuckle a little bit when we have years like this, that some years electric is better.
I don't chuckle like
So it's no, it has been difficult, but not the most difficult, I would say. Dealing with federal funds is probably the most challenging thing when we're have millions and millions of dollars of COVID, I'll term as COVID monies in and out, and trying to manage that shuffle game. But it's all good budget, I think. I mean, you guys pumped it all into staff, and as you know, this industry doesn't survive on the pens and pencils that we buy. It survives on the people in front of the kids.
Would just like to also say thank you for all the management you do with the funds as well as your team. Because I think even as unpredictable as the economy has been and the prices have gone up, I would say that our patrons and our staff, they don't get squeezed, even though we might. And it's because of the work that you've built in. You know, specific example, like bus passes, we didn't increase the price. You know, we were able to keep that steady, still picking up the reduced lunch fee. I mean, there's things that are out of our control, but really being able to not have to pass down those added financial pressures because of the work that your team does. So thank you.
One positive thing of all the inflation and whatnot is just the other day I was able to purchase 2 treasury notes for $1 million apiece that were yielding 2.79%. So that pumped an additional $50,000 or $60,000, and we haven't had investment revenue for years. So that enabled us to another 50, 60 grand, and I get that in there to utilize because it's money that kids are entitled to. Anyhow.
So Madam
Hey,
Chair,
Paul,
sorry, David, go ahead.
Paul, this is David, and I was out of line for my first meeting, but is there any of the assumptions that you've done in the budget, which of all of those ones, which gives you the most pause or keeps you up at night? Is there a certain inflation assumption, or you've talked about enrollment, you've talked about fuel costs, any of the ones that kind of you feel are more fickle than the other? I know I'm asking you to look in the future with your magic ball, but anything that keeps you or worries you the next year?
So, David, I'm going to restate your question for the sake of the community that are in attendance. The question from Mr. Bell was, what budget assumption scares you the most, or what item within the budget is the most worrisome to you in terms of volatility? Did I get that right, David?
Yes, or is there something next year that if happens would cause us to be concerned?
Tell you that,
Yeah.
for me, that's an easy question to answer because on all of the increases in material costs and all that, I'm very confident in what we have in there. There's stuff that's going to be higher. I get it and whatnot, but we average that out over there, and I'm pretty confident in that. The one that, and you use the term, keeps me up at night. Yes, it does keep me up, and that's enrollment. That one will keep me up at night. And as we talk about ad nauseum, that drives everything we got here. And so that's a big deal. But the good thing about that, we're well positioned for those ebbs and flows. I mean, you can never be perfect on all those enrollment projections. I'd like to think I can be perfect, but they're difficult sometimes, and weird things happen. So that would be the one thing that keeps me up at night, other than the Twins baseball game.
Madam Chair, it is a public hearing as required by statute, so at this time we would like to invite any members of the public in attendance that would like to comment on the proposed budget at this time to step forward to the mic. Would note for the record, no public comment.
Again, thank you very much, Mr. Lundberg, for your presentation of our annual budget hearing. It is very appreciated.